In this video, we're going to explore the relationship between thinking and language and thinking. And clearly, from a cognitive point of view, language greatly enhances our ability to think. That is, in Piaget's theory of cognitive development, one of the largest milestones is, in fact, language, because what language does is it allows to mentally represent objects that are no longer present. And so if I tell you to think of a banana, though in some ways you'll have a visual image of banana, but part of that image will be literally the word banana. Okay, so it's just part of our thinking process. So you can have thought without language, but without language, thought will be greatly limited. Okay. So we find number one that all languages are fundamentally related to each other, and there's these fascinating language family trees that show the divergence of different languages as across time. Okay, quite fascinating that we all, in theory, came from the same one language. I mean, that's what the Old Testament talks about with the Tower of Babel, right? So we find though Westerners tend to view spoken word more than East Asians do. That is to say, Westerners talk more, right? That's just what it comes down to. And so, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is freedom of speech. Clearly, in a Western perspective, speech is sacred. But whereas in the Eastern perspective, Lao Tzu, he who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know. All right, it's kind of a different way of viewing things. So when it comes to this question about language and thinking, Benjamin Whorf came up with this hypothesis, and he had a strong version that he first came up with when he discovered that the language of the Hopis did not have past tense for verbs. And so he argued because they don't have past tense for verbs, they can't remember the past. Now, clearly that makes no sense. Of course, these speakers can, but you have to imagine having a lack of past tense verbs will influence the way that they remember things. And so the strong version of Worf's hypothesis has very much been rejected. But this weaker version has definitely come to be accepted quite clearly. So just as an interesting example here, we find that, here is the colors, Roy G. Biv, we're familiar. You start with red on the left, Roy G. Biv, as you go across, and we see these different colors. And generally speaking, Westerners view, 8 different primary colors or something. But it turns out around the world that this notion of having 8 primary colors, which pretty much match up with the color of the crayons in an 8 colored Crayola crayon box, well, it's not just normal. It turns out that there's many languages in the world that only have 2 words for color, black and white. Everything is either black or white. There is no other in between. But what's interesting is that some cultures have 3 words, and those languages that have 3 words, they'll always be black, white, and red, or some version close to it. And so you find a very predictable pattern as languages have more and more color words that they emerge in very predictable fashions. Now, what's interesting to me is that um, until you have existed in a culture that has created mixing paints or something like that, why do you need to know chartreuse or midnight spat? I don't know what's a color, midnight taupe or some shit. Why would you need to know these things until such a thing is possible? So in many cultural contexts, they don't have a need to describe these additional colors. But what happens is in some cultures, because they may have extra words or different words, it becomes easier for them to remember things. So in some cultures that do not distinguish between red and pink, they might have a very hard time remembering these colors later. But some other cultures it would be easier because they have these distinct words, red and pink. Okay. But one of the biggest things that I find the most fascinating is that in some cultures, they do not have what we refer to as egocentric spatial terms, left and right. Because what happens is, you take your car to the mechanic and you go, the left front tire is wobbly. And the mechanic will say, "Is that my left or your left?" And it's like they think it's the funniest joke in the world, but it's like it's true. It's just such a stupid thing to use this word left and right and in front of, behind. I mean, these are just dumb. Okay. Many languages instead have locations that are like north, east, south, and west. I mean, these things don't change, right? They are what they are. And so, in some studies, they compared Dutch speakers that do have egocentric spatial terms and this other ooh, gesundheit. There's the there. I don't know what that is, but these other speakers. I think these are Australian Aborigines, but I can't promise that. But anyway, the speakers of this language do not have egocentric spatial terms. And so what they did was they brought them into a room and they showed them these three objects: cow, pig, human, and they are all facing north. And so what happens is if they bring them into a second room, the Dutch speakers are thinking the cow is on the left, the human is on the right. And therefore, I don't care what direction I'm facing in, I will reproduce cow on the left. However, a speaker of the yes, if they're facing north, then cow is in the west. Okay, and if cow is in the west, then if I'm facing south, cow must be in the west. And so they flip them, except in their mind, they didn't flip them. They left them exactly where they were supposed to be. Some cultures also represent time differently. Um, English speakers tend to, because we read on a page starting at the left and moving to the right, we view the passage of time as left to right. And so an Arabic speaker, on the other hand, would look at this image and go, okay, it's a silly image, but it's backwards, right? They wouldn't, they'd see it in this direction. Meanwhile, you go to another group whatever. I know these are Aboriginals, Australian Aboriginals, and you ask them to put these pictures in order. And the English speakers will go left to right, youngest to oldest. Whereas the speakers of Thuyur, which have no egocentric spatial terms, and they in fact view east and west, they will always view the passage of time as traversing. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. And therefore, if you're facing south, then the child is in the east. If you're facing north, then the child is in the east. We find that even in these ways, we find these egocentric spatial terms are a relatively new cultural invention. They don't seem to have existed in more non-Western cultures. And in fact, as some evidence, you cannot teach chimpanzees left and right. They will never be able to understand it. They can understand north and south. They can use landmarks to navigate, but they do not understand left and right. They just can't possibly figure it out. Well, we also find that numbers are a cultural invention, and numbers are kind of stupid if you think about it. 'Cause, I mean, from a simple perspective, if I have 0 apples and I'm hungry and you give me 1 apple, that is amazing. If I have 99 apples and I'm hungry and you give me 1 apple, I don't care. Yet, from a Western perspective, one is one. You went from 0 to 1, you went from 99 to 100. That is a unit of one. And it is perceived in the same way. But realistically, that just makes no sense. And so what you find is a group here. These are a tribe in the Amazon, the Paraha, and in their language, their number systems are one, two, many, 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 many. Okay, one, two, many. Everything after two is just many. And you'd have to imagine in their cultural world, one means I have enough for today. Two means I can probably manage tomorrow. Many means it's time to share, right? I mean, that's pretty much what it probably comes down to. And so you find even on a simple task like this, where the researchers went in and said, all right, just copy these, the researcher makes one dash on the left, the Paraha makes one dash on the right. Two dashes, three, three. But by the time you got to five, six, or seven, it just collapsed. It just didn't work. Okay, they couldn't even do a simple task like this. Well, what to my perspective would be simple. Okay, And in fact, you find out that um, young children, before they've been educationed, educationalized, something like that, or other groups, and including chimpanzees, okay, they don't appear to represent the world in this simplistic, one equals one no matter where it goes, right? 0 to 1 is the same as a 99 to 100. It's like, no. They represent the world in a logarithmic sense. That is, a change from 0 to 1 is equivalent as a change from 10 to 20, which is equivalent to, no, 10 to 100, I guess that would be, wouldn't it? No, wait, 1? Yeah, 1 to 10 to 100, yeah. So, it's just like between 0 and 1 is the same as between 10 and 20, and between 10 and 20 is the same as between 100 and 200, It's kind of exponentially goes like this.